You hear the screaming first, not the kind that comes from battle or childbirth. You've heard those screams before, raw and primal, but somehow still human. No, this is different. This sound tears through the marble corridors of the palace, like something being ripped from the world itself. A shriek so visceral, it makes the guards outside press their backs against the cold stone walls and pray to gods they've half forgotten. You stand in the doorway of the imperial chamber, and the smell hits you next. Copper and roses, blood and perfume. The physicians have tried to mask it, burning frankincense in bronze censers that swing from the ceiling, but underneath that sacred smoke, you can smell her dying. The Empress of Rome, the most powerful woman in the known world, and she is being destroyed from the inside out. The silk sheets beneath her are no longer purple, they're black with old blood, and fresh crimson still seeps from between her legs in rhythmic pulses that match her weakening heartbeat. Her attendants, women who have bathed her in milk and adorned her with pearls since she was a girl, now hold her down. Their knuckles are white, their eyes are hollow. They've been holding her down for hours. The physician, the best in the empire, summoned from Alexandria at the cost of a legion's wages, withdraws his hand from inside her body. His arm is red to the elbow. In his palm, he holds something small and gray, something that was supposed to be an heir, but became a curse instead. He doesn't look at it. No one does. A slave rushes forward with a cloth, and the thing disappears. Spirited away to be burned or buried or thrown into the Tiber, where the Senate will never have to acknowledge it existed. But you see something else, something the official histories will never record. The way the physician's hands tremble as he reaches for the iron instrument heating in the brazier's coals. The way the Empress's eyes, once sharp enough to command armies with a glance, go wide and animal with terror as she realizes what comes next. The way the eldest handmaiden turns away and makes a sign against evil that predates Rome itself. They're going to cauterize her from the inside. This is not medicine. This is torture dressed in the robes of healing. And she is not the first empress to endure it. She will not be the last. The iron glows orange in the firelight. Steam rises from the blood still pooling beneath her. And as the physician approaches her again, as her screams reach a pitch that sounds like something breaking in the fabric of the universe, you understand a truth that historians have spent 2,000 years trying to bury. The Roman Empire did not just conquer with swords and legions, it consumed its empresses. It devoured them in ways so brutal, so intimate, so carefully hidden behind golden doors and official silence, that even now, even after all these centuries, we can barely speak their names without choking on the horror of what was done to them. This is the story they don't want you to know. The story written not in marble and bronze, but in blood and burnt flesh, and the kind of suffering that leaves no monuments, only whispers, only fragments, only the occasional confession found in a letter that somehow survived when everything else was destroyed. You think you know Rome? You know the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the Forum. You know Julius Caesar and Augustus and Marcus Aurelius. But you don't know this. You don't know what happened in the birthing rooms where empresses labored for 3 days straight, while senators waited in the halls outside, calculating who would benefit if she died. You don't know about the poisons administered so carefully that even the imperial food tasters couldn't detect them. Poisons that didn't kill, but rendered wombs barren or drove women slowly, inexorably mad. You don't know about the abortions performed with instruments that wouldn't be out of place in an executioner's toolkit, the forced pregnancies. The babies ripped from bodies before they were ready to give birth because the emperor needed an heir now. Political timing be damned, her survival secondary to the calendar of power. You don't know about the empresses who were disappeared, the ones whose statues were chiseled into oblivion overnight, the ones whose very names were carved out of the historical record with such precision that for centuries scholars assumed they never existed at all until someone found a fragment of inscription, a partial sentence, a ghost of a woman who once ruled the world and then was erased so completely that even her suffering was denied. The iron touches her flesh. The sound it makes, the sizzle, the wet crackling, is something you'll hear in your nightmares for the rest of your life. Her back arches off the bed so violently that 3 women can barely hold her down. The 4th has fainted. A 5th runs from the room, and you hear her retching in the corridor, great heaving sobs between each convulsion. The physician works in silence. His face is a mask. He's done this before. He'll do it again. This is what Rome demands of its healers, its empresses, its women. This is the price of power when power is measured in male heirs and political alliances and the desperate, blood-soaked arithmetic of dynasty. Outside, the city celebrates. Tomorrow the emperor will announce that his wife has taken ill, nothing serious, just the normal complications of childbirth. The Senate will send their well wishes. The priests will perform sacrifices for her swift recovery. The people will gossip and speculate and eventually forget. But you're here, in this room, watching, and you will carry this truth into the dark. The question is, will you be brave enough to speak it? Because what you're witnessing isn't an isolated incident. It's not one empress having one terrible experience. This is the systematic, sanctioned torture of the women who stood at the pinnacle of the most powerful empire the world had ever known. This is what happened when absolute power met patriarchy, met the brutal, unforgiving politics of Rome. And it's about to get so much worse than you can possibly imagine. Let's go back. Back before the screaming, before the blood, before the instruments of torture masquerading as medical tools. Back to when being an empress seemed like a dream instead of a death sentence. Picture her as she was on her wedding day. 16 years old, maybe younger. Rome married its daughters young, especially when those daughters were being wed to men who could reshape the world with a word. She's beautiful in the way that painters and poets will spend the next decade trying to capture. Dark hair arranged in the ornate style of the imperial court. Dozens of tiny braids woven with gold thread and studded with pearls. Her stola is purple, that sacred Tyrian purple that costs more than most citizens will earn in a lifetime. Each thread dipped in the extracted blood of thousands of murex snails. She is radiant. She is terrified. She is both at once. Her family has prepared her for this moment since birth. Noble Roman families, the genes with bloodlines stretching back to the founding of the Republic, groomed their daughters like racehorses, teaching them the arts of governance. Rhetoric, household management, the delicate dance of political influence that women were allowed to perform as long as they never acknowledged they were performing it. She's been educated by the finest tutors, has read Virgil and Homer in their original languages, can calculate the household accounts faster than most senators, and has been instructed in the one subject that matters more than all others combined: how to produce a male heir. Because that's what this is really about. Not love, though the poets will write about love, will pen verses comparing her eyes to stars and her skin to marble. Not partnership, though she and the emperor will stand side by side at public ceremonies, her hand in his, the picture of marital harmony. Not even sex, though there will be plenty of that. Scheduled and monitored and scrutinized by palace staff, whose job it is to track her cycles like farmers watching the phases of the moon. No, this is about one thing: her womb. She is a vessel. A sacred vessel, to be sure, draped in silk and gold and political significance, but a vessel nonetheless. Her body is not her own. It belongs to Rome, to the Senate, to the endless, hungry maw of dynasty that demands fresh blood, new heirs, the continuation of the imperial line at any cost. And oh, the cost! But she doesn't know that yet. On her wedding day, she's still full of the romantic notions that even the most pragmatically educated Roman girl couldn't help but harbor. Maybe he'll be kind. Maybe he'll value her counsel, invite her into the private discussions of state that happen behind closed doors. Maybe she'll be like Livia, Augustus's wife, who wielded power so deftly that historians still debate whether she was the true architect of Rome's golden age. Maybe she'll be like Agrippina the Elder, beloved by the people and the legions, her influence so great that emperors trembled at her disapproval. She doesn't yet understand that for every Livia, there were a dozen empresses whose names you'll never learn. For every Agrippina who seized power and held it, there were scores of women who were crushed by it, their bodies broken in the service of an empire that viewed them as little more than aristocratic breeding stock. The wedding ceremony is magnificent. Half the Senate attends. The priests perform the ancient rites, slaughtering a white bull and reading the future in its steaming entrails. The signs are auspicious, they announce. The gods smile upon this union. She will be fertile. She will give Rome many sons. The crowd cheers. Her new husband places his hand on her belly, a gesture of possession, of prophecy, of promise. She smiles. She's been trained to smile. The smile is part of the performance, part of the elaborate theater that is Roman power. That night, the consummation is witnessed. Not directly, they're granted that privacy at least, but the palace staff wait outside the bedchamber, and in the morning, they'll inspect the sheets for proof of virginity, proof of penetration, proof that the marriage is legitimate and the line of succession secure. She bleeds the appropriate amount. The midwives nod their approval. Everything is proceeding according to plan. For the first few months, it's almost pleasant. The emperor is 20 years her senior. But he's kind enough and busy enough with the business of ruling that she has time to establish herself in the palace hierarchy. She makes alliances with the older women of the court, the mothers and grandmothers of senators, the priestesses of Vesta, who hold more real power than their virginal status might suggest. She learns which slaves can be trusted and which are spies for rival factions. She navigates the treacherous waters of imperial favor with a grace that impresses even the most cynical observers. She's good at this. She discovers, to her own surprise, that she has a talent for politics. When the emperor asks her opinion on a proposed treaty with the Parthians, she gives him an analysis so sharp and comprehensive that he brings her into the discussion with his advisors. When a dispute arises between two prominent families over a matter of inheritance, she mediates with such diplomacy that both parties leave satisfied and in her debt. For a moment, a brief, shining moment, she thinks this might actually work. She might be more than just a womb. She might be a partner, an advisor, a power in her own right. And then she misses her monthly bleeding. The physicians are summoned. They examine her with clinical detachment, probing and prodding, asking questions about her humors and her diet, and whether she's experienced any strange dreams. After 3 of them have confirmed it, the announcement is made. The Empress is with child. Rome explodes with joy. The Senate declares a public holiday. Sacrifices are made at every temple in the city. The Emperor, who has been married twice before but has never produced a legitimate heir, radiates pride. He showers her with gifts, a villa in the countryside, a necklace of emeralds that once belonged to Cleopatra, a slave girl from Britannia whose sole job is to sing her lullabies. She is radiant. She is celebrated. She is Rome's most precious treasure. She has no idea that she's just signed her own death warrant. Because here's what the histories don't tell you, what the official records carefully omit, what the poets deliberately ignore. Pregnancy in ancient Rome was a death sentence handed down with flowers and applause. 1 in 3 women died in childbirth or from complications in the weeks that followed. 1 in 3. Those are the numbers archaeologists have pieced together from skeletal remains, from epitaphs on tombs, from the conspicuous silence in family records where women's names simply stop appearing. And those are just the average women. Empresses had it worse. Why? Because average women could labor in peace. They could take their time, let their bodies work at their own pace, attend to by midwives who had delivered hundreds of babies and knew when to intervene and when to let nature take its course. They could give birth in whatever position was most comfortable, squatting, kneeling, supported by other women who held them upright and whispered encouragement. Empresses birthed on their backs in marble rooms with senators pacing outside. They labored under the scrutiny of court physicians whose careers depended on producing a living heir, who would intervene early and often with instruments and techniques that had never been properly tested, who believed that aristocratic bodies were fundamentally different from common bodies and required specialized, aggressive treatment. Empresses were fed bizarre concoctions meant to strengthen the womb or ensure a male child. Crushed pearls in wine, powdered precious stones, remedies that contained mercury and lead and other toxins that we now know cause birth defects and miscarriages. They were bled regularly because Roman medicine believed that women contained too much blood and needed to be drained of the excess. They were forced to exercise when they should have been resting, or forced to rest when exercise might have helped them, all according to the contradictory theories of competing physicians, each trying to prove their method superior. And if the birth went wrong, when the birth went wrong, there was no anesthesia. No real pain relief beyond wine and poppy tea that barely took the edge off, just iron instruments, desperate cutting, the kind of emergency interventions that saved the baby sometimes, but destroyed the mother's body in the process. But she doesn't know this yet. She's in her 4th month of pregnancy, and she's never felt more powerful. The emperor consults her on every major decision. The Senate seeks her favor. Common people line the streets when her litter passes, throwing flower petals and calling out blessings. She is beloved. She is doomed. And in the palace basements, in rooms she doesn't even know exist, the physicians are already preparing the instruments they might need. The hooks and blades and terrible tools that every generation of doctors swears they've improved, made more humane. Refined into instruments of healing rather than torture. They're lying. They've always been lying. The tools are waiting. The empire is watching. And her body, her precious, treacherous body, is about to become a battlefield where Rome's need for heirs clashes with the brutal reality of ancient obstetrics. The question isn't whether she'll survive. The question is how much she'll suffer first. It starts with a cramp. Just one. Sharp and low in her belly, arriving in the middle of a state dinner where she's seated next to a visiting king from Numidia. She's in the middle of a sentence, something diplomatic about trade routes and mutual prosperity, when the pain hits, and for just a moment, her mask slips. Her hand goes to her abdomen. Her eyes widen. The Numidian king notices and stops mid-bite, concern flickering across his face. She recovers quickly, smiles, waves it away as nothing. The air is restless, she says, and everyone at the table laughs, relieved, charmed by the image of an energetic baby already making its presence known. The emperor reaches over and places his hand on her belly, proprietary and proud. More laughter, more wine. The dinner continues, but she knows. Women always know. That wasn't the baby kicking. That was something else, something wrong. That night, alone in her chamber after the emperor has returned to his own rooms, they maintain separate quarters, seeing each other primarily for official functions and the carefully scheduled attempts at procreation. She examines herself. There's a spot of blood on her undergarments, small, brownish. Old blood, not fresh. The kind of spotting that midwives assure pregnant women is normal. Nothing to worry about, happens all the time. She tells herself they're right. It's nothing. It's normal. Women's bodies do strange things during pregnancy. She's read all the medical texts her tutors provided, knows that bleeding can occur without indicating disaster. She burns the stained cloth in the brazier, watches it curl and blacken, takes the ashes and grinds them under her heel as if destroying the evidence can unmake the event itself. She doesn't tell anyone, not yet, because she's beginning to understand the precariousness of her position. The emperor has grown more attentive since her pregnancy was announced. Yes, but she's also noticed the way his eyes sometimes linger on younger women at court. She's heard the whispers about his first wife, the one who failed to produce an heir and was quietly divorced. Sent away to a country estate where she lives in comfortable exile, her name mentioned only in whispers, her failure a cautionary tale that every new empress inherits like a curse. 3 days later, it happens again. More blood this time, and pain that doubles her over while she's alone in the library, sending scrolls tumbling from her nerveless fingers. A slave finds her on her knees, arms wrapped around her middle, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood to keep from screaming. The slave runs for help. Within minutes, the room fills with physicians, midwives, the emperor's personal attendants, even a priest who begins muttering prayers to Juno, goddess of childbirth, as if divine intervention might staunch the bleeding that's now soaking through her stola. They carry her to her bedchamber. The chief physician, an elderly Greek who studied in Alexandria and charges fees that would bankrupt most noble families, examines her with hands that smell of wine and myrrh. His face reveals nothing, but she can read the truth in his silence, in the way he exchanges glances with his assistants, in the tightness around his eyes. "The child?" she asks. Her voice sounds distant to her own ears, as if it's coming from the end of a long tunnel. Resting, he says smoothly. Too smoothly. You must rest as well, Domina. Bed rest, complete. No visitors, no exertion. The servants will attend to your every need. It's a prison sentence delivered as a prescription, but she's too frightened to argue. She lets them settle her into bed, lets them surround her with pillows and blankets despite the summer heat, lets them feed her foul-tasting concoctions that are supposed to strengthen her womb, but mostly make her drowsy and confused. For 2 weeks, she lies in that bed. The blood continues, sometimes just spotting, sometimes gushes that make the midwives clutch their amulets and whisper prayers. Her belly, which had just begun to swell with the promising roundness of new life, seems to soften, deflate, lose its tautness. The physicians try everything: herbs and potions, poultices placed on her abdomen, prayers and sacrifices, even the application of a copper disc that's supposed to draw out bad humors through some mysterious sympathetic magic. Nothing works. On the 15th day, she wakes to find the Emperor sitting beside her bed. It's the middle of the night. She can tell by the quality of the darkness beyond the oil lamps, and he's still wearing his formal purple-edged toga as if he came directly from some official function. His face is haggard. He looks older than she's ever seen him. The physicians say... He stops, starts again. They say the child is lost, that your body is rejecting it, that we must intervene before the dead tissue poisons your blood. Dead tissue. That's what her baby has become in the clinical language of medicine. Dead tissue. Material to be removed, a problem to be solved. She doesn't cry. She's beyond crying. She feels hollowed out, scooped clean, a vessel that has failed in its primary purpose. How? She whispers. He looks away. Drugs to speed the process. If that doesn't work, tools. It must come out, one way or another. The drugs are administered that night. Ergot, extracted from infected rye, a powerful stimulant that causes the womb to contract. The pain is immediate and overwhelming, waves of cramping that make her previous discomfort seem like a gentle warning. She labors for hours, attended by grim-faced midwives who've seen this before, who know that first pregnancies often end this way, but can't say so because the Empress isn't supposed to be like common women. Her body is supposed to be special, blessed, guaranteed to produce heirs through divine favor and aristocratic superiority. But her body doesn't care about aristocracy. Her body is just a body, subject to the same failures and tragedies as any peasant woman bleeding out in a slum tenement. Near dawn, something passes from her. She doesn't look, can't look. The midwives wrap it quickly in cloth and spirit it away. Later she'll learn it was cremated in secret, no funeral rites, no acknowledgement that it was ever alive enough to warrant mourning. The imperial family cannot afford to acknowledge such failures publicly. She expects it to be over then, the pain to stop, the nightmare to end. She expects to be allowed to grieve in private before being sent back to the Emperor's bed to try again. Because of course they'll try again. That's what Empresses do. They try and try and try until their bodies finally cooperate or break completely. But it's not over. There's still material inside, the Greek physician announces after examining her the next morning. His hands, when they withdraw from her body, are bloody. Dead tissue, fragments of the placenta. If we don't remove it, infection will set in. You'll be dead within a week. Then remove it, she says. She's too exhausted to care anymore, too broken to protest whatever they have planned. We'll need to use instruments, he says carefully. It will be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That's the word he uses. Uncomfortable. As if what's about to happen can be dismissed with such a bland, civilized term. They don't prepare her, not really. There's no time for psychological preparation when infection is a ticking clock. They position her as they did for the examination. Legs spread, body exposed, vulnerable in a way that makes her want to weep if she had any tears left. The instruments come out of a leather case the physician's assistant has been carrying. Metal gleams in the lamplight. Hooks and curettes and terrible spoon-shaped things whose purpose she can't quite fathom, but knows instinctively will cause her agony. 2 midwives hold her legs, another 2 take her arms. A 5th stands ready with cloths to absorb the blood. The physician applies a little olive oil to the largest instrument, the scraping tool, as if lubrication will make this bearable. It doesn't. When he enters her body with that cold metal, she screams. Not the polite cry of a woman in pain, but a raw animal shriek that comes from somewhere primal, somewhere beyond civilization and propriety. The midwives hold her tighter. The physician doesn't stop. He's scraping inside her, dragging that terrible tool along the walls of her womb, dislodging tissue that her body failed to expel naturally. This is what they don't tell you about miscarriage in the ancient world. It's not a sad but brief event. It's torture, sanctioned, medicalized torture performed by professionals who believe they're saving your life while they're destroying everything that makes that life worth living. The procedure lasts 20 minutes. It feels like hours. When it's finally over, when the physician withdraws his instruments and declares her cleared, she's shaking so violently that her teeth chatter. Sweat has soaked through the linens beneath her. There's so much blood that the slaves will have to burn the mattress. There, the Greek says with satisfaction, washing his hands in a basin of rose water. You'll recover now. A few weeks of rest, and you'll be ready to conceive again. You're young, strong. This is merely unfortunate. It happens. Next time will be different. Next time. As if she's a garden that failed to bloom on the first planting but will surely flourish with another season. As if her body is something to be optimized and managed rather than mourned. As if what just happened to her, the loss of her child, and the violation of her most intimate self by metal instruments wielded by a man who feels nothing, is simply a minor setback on the road to producing an heir. She says nothing. What is there to say? She's an empress. This is what empresses do. They endure, they survive, they try again. But something has broken inside her, something that has nothing to do with her womb. She's beginning to understand the game she's trapped in, the rules that were never clearly explained, but are now becoming horrifyingly apparent. Her body is not her own. Her pain doesn't matter. Her grief is inconvenient. She is valuable only insofar as she can produce, and when she fails to produce, she becomes a problem to be solved with drugs and instruments, and the clinical detachment of men who will never, ever have to experience what they're putting her through. The emperor visits that evening, stays for 10 minutes, pats her hand, tells her not to worry, that these things happen, that she's young, and they have time. He doesn't ask how she feels, doesn't acknowledge the trauma she's just endured. Because to acknowledge it would be to acknowledge that what the physicians did to her was wrong. And if it was wrong, then how will they justify doing it again when the need arises? And the need will arise. It always does. After he leaves, she lies in the darkness and stares at the frescoed ceiling where gods and heroes enact eternal dramas of glory and triumph. None of those painted figures are women screaming in birthing rooms. None are empresses hemorrhaging their failed pregnancies into silk sheets. The art, like the history that will be written about her, tells only the stories that power once remembered. Her story, the real story, the blood and the metal and the violation disguised as healing, will be erased, redacted, euphemized into a single sentence. The Empress suffered an early miscarriage but recovered well. Recovered, as if recovery is possible, as if what's been broken can simply be repaired with time and rest and the passage of seasons. She touches her empty belly, feels the cramping that still pulses through her like an echo of labor that produced nothing but grief. And she knows, with a certainty that cuts deeper than any physician's blade, that this is just the beginning. The curse has begun, and it will follow her for the rest of her life, however short that life may prove to be. Outside her window, Rome sleeps, the empire dreams of glory, and in this room, in this bed soaked with blood and failure, an empress learns the first terrible lesson that all Roman empresses eventually learn. Your body is a battlefield. You are both the territory being fought over and the casualty left behind when the battle is done, and the war has only just begun. The infection comes 3 days later. At first, it's just a fever, slight, manageable. The kind of warmth that could be attributed to the summer heat or the stress of recovery. But by nightfall, she's burning. The midwives pack her in cloths soaked with cool water, but within minutes the cloths are warm, heated by the fire consuming her from within. Her skin takes on a gray cast, her lips crack and bleed. And the smell, God, the smell that begins to emanate from between her legs is the smell of death, of rot, of flesh turning septic. The physicians return in force, 8 of them now, instead of the usual 3, because when an empress is dying, the entire medical establishment of Rome must be present to either save her or witness that everything possible was done. They argue in Greek and Latin about humors and bad airs, and whether the problem is too much heat or not enough, whether she should be bled or purged, or both. In the end, they do both. They open a vein in her arm and drain her until she's too weak to lift her head. They administer purgatives that leave her cramping and soiling herself like an infant, her dignity destroyed, along with any pretense that her body is sacred or special or deserving of privacy. The slaves who clean her don't meet her eyes. They've seen this before. They know how it ends. For 6 days, she hovers between life and death. The fever breaks and returns, each cycle leaving her weaker. Her hair falls out in clumps, her gums bleed, the whites of her eyes turn yellow. The Greek physician finally admits what everyone already knows. The instruments introduced infection deep into her womb. And now that infection is spreading through her blood, poisoning every organ, shutting down her body system by system. He doesn't apologize. Infection is an unavoidable risk of the procedure, he explains to the emperor. The alternative was allowing the dead tissue to remain inside her, which would have killed her even faster. This way, at least, there's a chance. A chance. She clings to that word like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. A chance means maybe. Maybe she'll survive this. Maybe she'll recover. Maybe she'll get to try again, produce that heir, prove her worth, justify her existence. On the 7th day, the fever breaks and doesn't return. The physicians pronounce it a miracle. Prayers of thanksgiving are offered at every temple in Rome. The emperor, who has been sleeping in the room next to hers, close enough to monitor her condition but not so close that he risks catching whatever plague is consuming her, finally visits and stays for more than a few minutes. He looks relieved, grateful, and underneath that, she can see it clearly now. He looks calculating. He needs her alive. Not because he loves her, though he might, in the abstract way emperors love anything that serves their purposes, but because divorcing a wife who failed to produce an heir is politically complicated. It opens questions about his own fertility, his own divine favor, his own fitness to rule. Better to keep trying with her than start over with someone new. Rest, he tells her. Heal. We'll try again when you're strong. Try again. Those words become her mantra and her nightmare. She spends 3 months recovering, her body slowly repairing the damage the physicians inflicted while claiming to save her. The bleeding eventually stops. Her hair grows back, though thinner than before. Her strength returns, though she'll never feel quite the same. Will always have a weakness in her belly, a sensation like something inside her has been permanently torn. The palace physicians declare her healed. The emperor returns to her bed, and 4 months after her miscarriage, she's pregnant again. This time the fear is different. Before, pregnancy felt like triumph, like fulfilling her destiny. Now it feels like a death sentence being repeated, a trauma she's being forced to relive. Every twinge makes her freeze. Every spot of blood sends her into panic. She can't sleep, convinced that if she relaxes her vigilance for even a moment, her body will betray her again. The physicians prescribe remedies for her nerves. Wine mixed with valerian root, warm baths, gentle walks in the garden. Nothing helps. How can it? They're treating her anxiety as if it's irrational, as if she doesn't have excellent reasons to be terrified. They scraped her womb with metal instruments 6 months ago. They nearly killed her trying to save her. And now they expect her to calmly carry a pregnancy to term as if that first disaster never happened. But this time, she makes it past the dangerous early months. The quickening comes, that flutter of movement that signals life, actual life, something separate from her that's growing inside her. She allows herself to hope. The physicians are pleased. The emperor is attentive. The Senate makes preparations for the birth of an heir. And then, in her 7th month, the complications begin. Not bleeding this time, something worse. Swelling. Her feet puff up until they won't fit into her sandals. Her hands become thick and clumsy. Her face rounds, losing all its delicate bone structure, until she barely recognizes herself in the polished bronze mirrors. The physicians examine her and diagnose an excess of fluid, an imbalance of humors that's causing her body to retain water instead of expelling it naturally. The treatment is aggressive. Restricted fluids, diuretics made from crushed juniper berries and dandelion root, more bloodletting to drain the excess. She's constantly thirsty but forbidden to drink. Her urine turns dark and scanty. Her vision begins to blur at the edges. She develops headaches so severe that light becomes unbearable, forcing her to spend days in darkened rooms, while her skull throbs with a pain that feels like something inside her head is trying to claw its way out. What the physicians don't know, what medical science won't understand for another 1,800 years, is that she's developing what we now call preeclampsia, a pregnancy complication characterized by dangerously high blood pressure that can lead to seizures, organ failure, and death. In the modern world, It's manageable with careful monitoring and early delivery if necessary. In ancient Rome, it's a mysterious curse that strikes seemingly healthy women and kills them without warning. She's dying again. Slowly this time, her body poisoned not by infection, but by the very pregnancy everyone insisted she carry. And the worst part, the truly horrific part, is that everyone keeps telling her she's fine. The swelling is normal, they say. Pregnant women often retain fluid. The headaches are just stress. The vision problems are temporary. She needs to relax, trust the process, trust the physicians who have studied these matters for decades. But she knows her body. She knows something is catastrophically wrong. She can feel it in the way her heart races when she's lying still, in the way her breath comes short and labored, even though she's done nothing more strenuous than walk from her bed to a chair. She's drowning, she realizes. Drowning from the inside, her organs swelling with fluid, her blood pressure rising until her veins feel like they're going to burst through her skin. In her 8th month, the seizures start. The first one happens during a state dinner she's forced to attend, despite her protests that she doesn't feel well enough. One moment she's sitting upright, attempting to eat the food that tastes like ashes in her mouth. And the next moment the world whites out. Her body goes rigid, her back arches. Her teeth clench so hard that she bites through her tongue. Blood fills her mouth and spills down her chin, splattering onto the pristine white stola, specially made to accommodate her swollen belly. She convulses on the floor of the dining hall while senators and foreign dignitaries watch in horror. The physicians are summoned. They don't know what's happening. Demonic possession, one suggests. An angry god, claims another. A curse from a political enemy, whispers a third. They argue while she seizes, her body jerking and twitching. Foam mixing with blood at her lips, her eyes rolled back in her head showing only white. When the convulsions finally stop, she's unconscious. They carry her to her chambers, and when she wakes hours later, she has no memory of the dinner, no memory of the seizure, nothing but a terrible headache and the taste of blood in her mouth. The physicians declare that the baby must come out. Now. Immediately. Waiting for natural labor is too dangerous. She's too weak, too ill, too cursed. The child needs to be extracted while it's still alive, and before another seizure kills both mother and baby. They're going to cut her open. The Caesar section, named for Julius Caesar, who was supposedly born this way, though the story is almost certainly apocryphal, is a procedure of last resort. In ancient Rome, it's performed almost exclusively on dead or dying women, a desperate attempt to save the baby even if the mother can't be saved. The survival rate for women who undergo it while still alive is nearly zero. The physicians who perform it are essentially choosing the baby's life over hers. She understands this when they explain the procedure, understands that they're giving up on her, that her body, after all its failures and struggles and suffering, is being written off as an acceptable loss as long as the heir survives. No, she says. Her voice is weak but firm. Let it come naturally. Let me try. The emperor is summoned. He arrives still wearing his military uniform, having been interrupted during a training exercise with his personal guard. The physicians explain the situation. Emergency surgery is necessary. It's the only way to ensure the heir's survival, but the empress is refusing. He looks at her. She looks back. And in that moment, she sees the calculation happening behind his eyes. Wife versus heir, Mother versus baby. Her life versus the continuation of his bloodline. "Do the procedure," he says. "My lord," she whispers. "Please, I want to try. Give me a chance." "You've had your chances," he says, and his voice is not unkind, just terribly final. "Your body has proven unreliable. We can't risk losing the child because of your fear." Your fear. As if fear is irrational when they're about to slice her open without anesthesia beyond poppy wine that barely dulls the senses. As if she doesn't have excellent reasons to be terrified. She tries to argue. She's too weak. The midwives hold her down, gently, almost apologetically, but firmly nonetheless. The surgeon arrives, a different physician than her usual one, someone brought in specifically because he has experience with this procedure. He's performed it 17 times, she'll later learn. 15 of those women died. The 2 who survived were never able to walk properly again. Their abdominal muscles too damaged, their bodies too broken. Those aren't the kind of odds you want. But she doesn't have a choice. No one is asking her permission anymore. Her body has become state property, her survival less important than what can be extracted from her before she expires. They give her wine, lots of it, mixed with ground poppy and henbane and other herbs whose names she doesn't catch. The world goes soft and distant, but not distant enough. She can still feel everything when they lay her back on the table. When they position her legs and arms and secure them with leather straps because they know she'll thrash when the cutting starts. The surgeon approaches with his knife. It's sharp, sharper than any weapon, honed to an edge fine enough to split hair. That's the only mercy. A sharp blade cuts cleaner, heals faster, causes less collateral damage than a dull one. He makes the first incision. The cutting takes 47 minutes. You know this because someone counts. Someone always counts when history is being made, even when that history is being carved into a woman's flesh. 47 minutes of sawing through skin, fat, muscle. 47 minutes of her screams echoing through marble halls, while servants press their hands over their ears and pray to gods who seem to have abandoned this room entirely. 47 minutes of blood pouring onto the floor faster than the slaves can mop it up, creating pools that someone will later slip in, leaving a smear of imperial DNA across white marble that will take 3 days to fully scrub away. The surgeon works with mechanical precision. Layer by layer, he opens her. The scalpel parts skin like silk tearing. The underlying tissue resists more. He has to saw, has to apply real force, and she feels every stroke despite the drugs swimming through her blood. When he reaches the muscles of her abdomen, he doesn't cut through them cleanly. That would cause too much permanent damage. Instead, he separates them, pulling them apart like curtains, and the sensation of her own body being forced open from the inside makes her vomit. The midwives turn her head so she doesn't choke. The baby comes out screaming. A boy, healthy, perfect in every way that matters to an empire desperate for heirs. The surgeon holds him up like a trophy, and the room erupts in jubilation. Prayers of thanksgiving, exclamations of divine favor. Someone runs to tell the emperor, who's been pacing in the corridor outside because even he couldn't stomach watching this particular horror. No one notices that the mother has stopped screaming, that her eyes have rolled back, that the blood flow has increased from steady to catastrophic, the surgeon notices. He thrusts the baby at a midwife and turns back to the opened body on the table. The womb is damaged. He cut too deep, nicked an artery, and now blood is pumping out in rhythmic spurts that match her weakening heartbeat. He tries to cauterize it with a hot iron. The smell of burning flesh fills the room, acrid and wrong, mixing with the copper tang of blood and the already present stench of fear sweat and exposed organs. She's aware, but not aware. Floating somewhere between consciousness and oblivion, held in her body by the thinnest thread of will or curse or whatever force keeps people alive when they should already be dead. She hears voices but can't make out words, sees shapes moving but can't focus on faces. Everything is red or white or black, colors cycling in waves that match the pulse of pain radiating from her opened belly. "Stitch her," someone commands. Quickly. The stitching is worse than the cutting. At least the scalpel was sharp. The needle is thick, designed for canvas and leather, not human flesh. The surgeon sews her muscles back together with thread that feels like rope, each puncture and pull sending fresh agony through her nervous system. Her mouth opens, but no sound comes out. She's screamed herself voiceless. All she can produce is a rasping wheeze that sounds like wind through a broken window. Layer by layer, he closes her. Muscle, fat, skin. The stitches are crude but functional, more concerned with keeping her organs inside than with aesthetics. She'll have a scar from hip to hip, a thick rope of damaged tissue that will never fade, never heal smoothly, never let her forget what was done to her in the name of preserving an imperial bloodline. When it's finally over, they leave her on the table while they tend to the baby. Someone washes him, someone else weighs him. A third person begins the official documentation of his birth. The empress lies in a pool of her own blood, forgotten, her purpose fulfilled. She produced. That's all that matters. It takes 3 hours before someone remembers to move her to a bed. She survives the surgery. Barely. But what survives isn't really her anymore. Not the woman she was. Not even the traumatized, broken version of herself that existed before the cutting. What survives is something else, something hollowed out and haunted. The infection comes within days, of course. You can't open a human body with instruments that were used on the previous patient without washing them. Can't sew someone shut with thread that's been sitting in a leather bag crawling with bacteria, and expect them not to develop sepsis. The fever returns, worse than before. Her wound weeps pus and blood, the stitches pulling apart in places, revealing glimpses of the meat beneath. The physicians try everything. More cauterization. Poultices made from bread mold and spider webs and crushed herbs. Prayers and incantations. Nothing works. The infection spreads, tracking up her belly in red lines that mark the path of poisoned blood through poisoned veins. She's dying. Everyone knows it. The priests have been called. The emperor has visited to say goodbye, bringing the baby to her one last time so she can see what her sacrifice produced. She's too weak to hold him, can barely focus her eyes on his small, perfect face. He's beautiful. He's worth it. That's what she's supposed to think, supposed to feel. That her suffering was meaningful because it produced this male child who will grow up to rule an empire,